People just keep using it because they know someday Greg will redeem it.
Is this something like inflating a balloon, just
sort
making
of.
something bigger?
Because
and
you get the idea now, say, wow, this is really cool. Maybe I could do some more of these things and buy stuff with just my IOU, and I don't have to work for it. And people say, oh, Greg's a good guy. You know, he's as good as the United States government for this.
Please. Yeah.
And they circulate it, but nobody ever comes to you and says, I want to redeem it. Okay, well, nobody's hurt, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What happens if they come to you, though, and you say, I'm sorry, I don't redeem those anymore?
Well, then somebody's going to get angry, or if I'm bigger than they are and more threatening, they'll back off.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is when they did the silver certificates and the gold certificates, in 1933, they stopped redeeming gold certificates. You couldn't own gold anymore. So if you took a gold certificate to the Treasury, they said, I'm sorry, we don't redeem these anymore. What happened? They just stole your gold.
Yeah.
Okay. In 1965, the same thing happened with silver certificates.
You know, I remember when I was a kid, you could go into the bank and give them a dollar bill, whatever you want to call that thing, and they would give you a silver dollar. And I felt a little, even back then as a kid, I could think, I'd rather have that nice-looking thing as opposed to this piece of paper.
And I remember kids in my school going and getting their silver. Okay. 1965, you could no longer do that.
Yep.
So what happened then? They stole your silver.
64, 65.
It was actually January 1st, 65 when you could no longer get silver.
Okay.
Okay. That date might be a little bit off, but I know 64 you could still get it.
I could remember it, yep.
I do too. So what happened is when you went with your silver certificate to get silver in 1965, you couldn't get it. They basically stole your silver from you.
Just by a little certificate. Just,
and you'll note that it says on the certificate that this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the United States Treasury or any Federal Reserve Bank. Well, if the certificate itself is redeemable in lawful money, that means it is not lawful money itself. And now, on all your certificates, it says this note is legal tender for, or this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. On the other note, the silver certificate, there was a period because it was a complete sentence. But now it's just a phrase. There's no period or anything. They're just floating notes around, and there's no backing at all. A real good example I read about is you hire manual labor to dig a trench for 100 bananas.
Okay.
Okay? He digs the trench, and he comes to you and says, the trench is done. I'd like to be paid. And you say, coming right up. And you get him his 100 bananas and hand it to him. Has he been paid?
I would say yes.
Yes, he has been.
He
said, I want 100 bananas, and he got 100 bananas, okay?
Yeah.
All right, now let's change the scenario a little bit.
Okay.
He digs the trench, and he comes to you and says, I would like to get paid. And you say, okay, well, I don't have the bananas here, but they're at the warehouse down the road. I will write you a receipt for 100 bananas, paid to the bearer, 100 bananas. Take this down there, and you get your bananas, okay? Now, when you hand him that note, has he been paid?
I would say, offhand, I'd say he's been half paid.
He hasn't been paid.
Yeah,
because
he hasn't
he's supposed to get his bananas. He hasn't got his bananas yet.
He has not had his exchange of goods.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, so he still doesn't have his bananas, but he does have a receipt that says he can get bananas.
Right, okay.
Okay? So he's like, okay, I don't mind going and getting my bananas. And he goes down to the warehouse and hands it to the warehouse manager and says, I'd like to get my bananas. And the warehouse manager says, coming right up. And he goes and brings him back 100 bananas and hands it to him. Now has he been paid?
Now he has been paid.
Now he has been paid. Okay?
Yep.
So this is not rocket science here.
Okay.
Now.
I like that when it's not rocket science, you know. So many of us just don't understand that sort of
Let's take another step here.
Okay.
Now manual labor comes to you after he's dug the trench, and you write him the receipt. Say, take it to the warehouse, and they'll take care of it.
Right.
And he says, okay. And then he goes down to the warehouse and hands it to the warehouse manager, and the warehouse manager says, you know, we don't redeem these anymore. I can give you 250 banana notes, or 520s, or 100 ones.
In other words, divide that little paper up.
Yeah, I can give you a whole bunch of these, but I can't give you bananas. And so manual labor says, but I want my bananas. Well, I can't give you bananas. Now, because we're talking about a legal tender law, he can't come back to you for your banana, to get the bananas from you, because you're protected now. Okay, so you've discharged the debt instead of paying it.
Yeah.
Okay? And so he can't come back to you. All he can do is take 250 banana notes or 520 banana notes, and when he does get them, has he been paid?
No.
He has not been.
No.
Because
No.
the value is not there.
Now, the next question is, to me anyway, thinking the way I do, what can he do? Say he does divide this up and get the smaller amounts. What can he do in this scenario, or is that where
He can find some poor sucker like himself to pay them in banana notes that are irredeemable. And when it's made official, we're all suckers.
Okay, now make the comparison to what we're ultimately talking. Go back to the bank.
Okay, well, the bank does
the
basically
bank that you
the same
used to
thing.
work in. Yeah.
What happened was by creating the loan that they were receiving interest on,
Mm-hmm.
and the checking account that the guy was able to use, what we did is we were getting interest on nothing. So in his case, I think it was a $250,000 loan. I don't remember for sure.
Yeah.
But at that time, I think the interest rates were somewhere in the neighborhood of 8%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that'd be roughly $12,000 a year in interest that they were collecting on nothing.
Yeah.
And the worst part about it is when they created the money, they didn't create the money to pay the interest.
So as long as this guy, manual labor, can go out there, I mean, he could potentially be happy if somebody would take the money, take the notes that he had, the
That's
banana
right.
notes.
And he might be able to go to a grocer and buy 100 bananas with a 100 banana note,
Yeah. But
but he's not redeeming it for 100 bananas.
But what you're getting at here is that we're doing the same thing
We are. What happens now,
with our national money, if you will.
you know, G. Edward Griffin has this fabulous book that really is scholarly. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island.
The Creature from Jekyll Island.
And it is very well done. I urge anybody who hears this to buy it and study it. Read it at least 10 times.
You can hear his lecture on YouTube, can't you?
Yes, you can. And there is a little 1-hour lecture he does, which is kind of a summary. Very well done. And what happened is he published it long after I became the enemy of the Federal Reserve, but
Yeah.
I just love that book.
1994, was it that it came
You
out?
know, I don't really remember.
Yeah, I think I remember.
But I know that I started my own mint in 1980
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to have a currency that was based on silver and gold that would compete with the Federal Reserve. Unfortunately, I didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I made a lot of silver bars, but nobody used them for currency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bernard von Nothaus, with the Liberty Dollar, got a lot closer to it, but then, of course, he was making himself felt,
Mm-hmm.
and the Liberty Dollar was hurting the Fed, and that's why the FBI went and seized all their silver and gold.
Yeah, and who was it? I'd heard one man wrote on the illegality of how they did all that.
Well,
sort of
nobody's
thing.
been charged with a crime,
That's right.
and so how can you seize property without a crime?
Yeah, there is a lawsuit out.
They
about
said
that now.
actually that he was almost counterfeiting. Well, then they should have almost seized the property, right?
Yeah, come up to the door and say, we're almost going to seize this
Yeah.
for you, but now we'll go away.
But he had the right idea about putting a dollar value on it and all that. Now, I have another idea. Of course, I don't want to go there yet because I need to explain something about the Federal Reserve. Because what happens is the reason the Federal Reserve has never been audited is because they won't allow it because there's nothing to audit. G. Edward Griffin puts it very clearly when he says they don't have an account. All they have is a checkbook. And they write the check to the federal government when the federal government gives them a bond issue or a treasury note issue. And they write the money out for the face value. But now the federal government's on the hook for the interest for this money they just wrote out of a check that's never going to clear.